All right. I saw you guys are fighting and scuffling in here. What's going on?
No drama. No drama. This is going to be an amazing night.
It
No
is going
drama.
to be an amazing night. An amazing night. I'm sitting in front of fish because I couldn't keep a good signal in the reptile room, so I just moved in here. But yeah, let me see who's in here right quick. There's Huawei, there's Beta, and Guppy Gal, also known as Patty, former Patty Petite, Trash Cat. What does beatboxing? Is Bob beatboxing again in this live? I don't know what that means. I'm getting put
Beatbox
off.
is a kind of music that's
Oh, I know what that is.
that
Yeah,
wasn't really it, but you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah.
My
If I
parrot
form,
loves it.
if I form a band, you're not in it, Susie.
No, that's right. I've already been told that.
Oh my God. Let's see. Trash Cat, Bob, I need to file a harassment charge against your mod. Go for it. Go for it. And it just,
Has a meeting with HR.
yeah, Susie's the HR lady, so there you
30
go.
years in HR. You need
There
an
you
HR
go.
director? Come on, come on. Let's have that chat on Friday afternoon. And bring your purse.
Right. Can you come with me and bring your purse? Right. All that moderator power. Hey, Jenny Lynn.
Jenny Lynn, hello. Hello, Patty. Hello, Catfish Terry.
Yeah,
There's
Dragon
so much
Lair.
fun. This is great.
Awesome. I think Catfish Cherry, you said that. Lucky Stone, I think that's everybody. But we'll have people start to come in. Yeah, people are coming in. Terry. Who are you saying Terry to? Oh, Catfish Terry. Duh.
Jamie Bollinger. I don't know Jamie. Hey, Bruiser.
I do. She ain't no good.
Woo!
She works, volunteers with me at the Ark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there an echo?
I don't hear it.
Okay. Maybe it's
But let's get right into it because we have a guest awaiting, and you guys have heard me talk about future guests or upcoming guests or people I've asked to come on. And Nate of Nate Snakes, Nathan, I see him a lot on Instagram and TikTok. He does have a YouTube channel, but I think I'm the third subscriber today. So get over there.
Oh.
Get over there and subscribe. He does have some content on there, but he's wanting to build up his YouTube channel too.
Oh, I can't wait till we get the link in the chat so I can go subscribe.
Yep. And but he I said before we went live, and I said it in front of him because he was here and he left, so we could bring him up, like formally. But he reminds me of a younger you, Patrick, or your son or something. He really knows things. So, and he's self-taught. The guy's pretty cool. Anyway, I guess having said that, we'll bring him up. I see him back there, and get him to tell us a little bit more about himself. And I know he wanted to talk about nutrition and snakes. And when we were talking last night, just to test out StreamYard, we talked about an hour because I kept picking his brain about stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I learned more in this test thing than I've learned in a lot of streams. The whole thing, appreciate the flowers, Bob. Okay. I guess I forgot that, but if I did, you're welcome. All right. So without further ado, let's see. Wait a minute. Guess. There we go. And add to stream. And there's Nate.
Hi.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing?
Great. Can I blow you up, Nick, so that you can be seen better? And okay.
Yeah.
All right. We practiced this last night, so. And he does lots of live streams, so he just hadn't done StreamYard, I think, before or in a while or something.
Oh, I love your dog mask above your head. That's pretty
cool.
cool.
Yeah, the jaguar mask from
Jaguar.
Mexico.
Okay, that's pretty cool looking.
Yeah, it's a hand-carved Aztec warrior's mask.
Very cool.
So tell us a little bit about you, like stuff like when did you get into reptiles and stuff like that, cool stuff.
Yeah, so I am from Western Washington, just a little ways outside of Seattle. I have been working with reptiles since I could walk. running around out in my yard or whoever's house I was at, their yard, catching snakes and lizards and all different kinds of little creepy crawly critters. It's just been a lifelong passion for me. So I've done as much as I can to educate myself in a lot of U.S. native species, especially, but especially the animals that I keep. I have tried to make it a point to learn everything that I can about them and their care, from medical perspective things. So like what are some illnesses that might affect the animals that I have? When is it going to be absolutely necessary to take them to the vet? What are some signs to look for that it's time to start looking into getting them into a doctor's office, things like that. Nutrition, just general husbandry. How can we improve upon that? A lot of the stuff that I will do on weekends with my free time, and I'm looking to get reconditioned to be able to go back out into the field next year, is actually researching certain animals in their native habitats, so that way I can apply all of the premium or the most prime conditions that they would exist in their natural habitat to their husbandry as we keep them in captivity. So that way we can provide everything that they're going to need that's at the peak of their season, without all of the worries of predation, lack of food, competition, lack of water, things like that.
Nice. I've seen some of your herping videos. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, lately it's been mostly around just the backyard, but I hope next year to be able to get back out into Eastern Washington, go out to maybe Oregon, at some point maybe Montana. I'm trying to figure out if I can maybe go even down to like Arizona.
And I know you've got a goal to breed I don't want to give away anything, so just cut me off, but to breed a certain snake from the area there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of Great Basin gopher snakes, Pituopus catenifer deserticola. They are a U.S. Native species of colubrid. They're fantastic animals, and I think that they would be right up there for a starting snake with like a corn snake or certain kinds of king snakes and milk snakes. They're very easy to take care of, but they're very interactive. They're a very intuitive animal. They have a lot of personality, and some of them have quite a bit of attitude, but they don't necessarily act on that most of the time. They'll mostly just put on a real good show for you.
I was listening when you used some of the descriptors like intuitive and personable, but you didn't say intelligent.
So for them, it just depends on how much you work them. If you allow these animals to just kind of exist in their enclosures without interacting with them, you're going to see much less of that intelligence come through. The more that you interact with them, the more that they learn that when you come into their enclosure to interact with them, that you're not a predator that's coming in to try to do them harm, then you'll start to see more of that intelligence that they would normally be applying to procuring prey or finding a mate or trying to avoid being eaten by something. They'll start to apply that to more of the enrichment side of it, and it becomes a much more intelligent, interactive animal.
Well, I always say that I have a San Diego Bay Area gopher snake, a female, and I wish I'd gotten the male too. I will eventually, but from immediately I just felt like that snake had a lot more going on than my corns and my balls, and it just seemed so much aware of what was going on around it and its environment and processing stuff. But I called it intelligence, so maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the stuff you said.
Yeah, I mean, they're a very, like when I say intuitive, I mean, they're very tuned in to what's going on around them without being overly reactive.
Right.
So you'll see them, they actually take really well to gesture training. The two snakes that I've worked with that seem to take best to that are the garter snakes, so anything from the Thamnophis genus. And then a lot of the Pituopus, they respond a lot to that visual stimulus, so it's very easy to use something like a quick little hand gesture like that to get their attention. And then you're basically it's not a full-blown command. It's more of a request, or that you're asking the animal to move from one side of its enclosure to the other. Whereas with garter snakes, it's a lot easier to be able to get them to do things that are a little bit more complex, like back up, move forward, move from side to side, get up out of the enclosure and come to your hand, and things like that.
Yeah, this is just a little bit about when you watch Nate's lives, that he really is in telling a deaf dog to be quiet. He just swat his butt. You know, he does interact with his snakes, and it's really cool because I think most of us talk to our fish and our reptiles and everything anyway. So it's just taking it, to me, a little step further, you know, and exploring that. I love it. But you were going to talk. I kind of went the wrong direction or a different direction, because you specifically wanted to talk about nutrition. So.
Yeah, so with snakes, you know, it's really common for us to see a lot of people feeding rodent feeders only, and our snakes can absolutely do just fine. They can thrive on that diet. But with that comes a lot of things like making sure that you have very specific setups for your UVB, which you should anyway, but then you get into things like supplements and, you know, calcium supplements, vitamin, other mineral kind of supplements. And while that's fine, we can actually provide most of that with a more balanced and varied diet. So I'm going to pull my ball python here and get her out. She's a little bit of a little feisty one because she really, really likes food. And I think that it's in part because she gets such a nice varied diet. But you'll see that she is very close to reaching her pretty much maximum length capacity or potential. She's a relatively large snake here, but she is not super fatty. She's not real chunky. She's very athletic. She's very lean. And this is kind of what would ideally want to see in a very healthy wild animal or an extremely healthy kept animal. The spine just comes up to a very gentle peak there. Try to arrange this so you guys can see it. So she's got just a nice gentle peak at the spine. The body is nice and muscly without being dried out and stiff and rigid. And it's because she gets a good mixture of higher fat, not super fatty, but higher fat and leaner proteins, and a lot of calcium and things like that in her diet, and other vitamins and minerals that are provided by organ meat from whole prey. So what I feed her is going to be largely rodents, but she will occasionally take like a chicken chick for me, or quail, any kind of small, appropriately sized bird.
Wow. And these are frozen thawed?
Yeah, so I feed all of my animals on a frozen thawed only diet. The reason that I do that is because it helps to greatly reduce the chances of her getting bitten, scratched, or in any other way, shape, or form harmed by the feeders that I'm offering her. It also really helps to reduce the chances of gastrointestinal and intermuscular digestional parasites. So anything that's going to get into their system via the digestive system.
Wow. Yes, she is Jenny Lynn. She is beautiful. What is her particular morph?
So as far as I know, she is just a normal. She may have some genes in there because of how people breed these animals. They almost always are hereditary, linked to some sort of special kind of color pattern mutation gene. But as far as I know, she is just a regular wild type. She does have some really nice colorations. There's a lot of yellows that come through in some of these spots. There are some good contrast in the whites of her stomach, and kind of coming up a little bit into some kind of minimal pixelation going up into the actual lateral markings and coloration.
She's really pretty.
Yeah, and her scale quality and skin quality is really, really good. So I'm really proud of her. And I mean, she does all the work. I just offer the food. She's the one that's got to make the decision to eat it and stay active. But she does a really good job of being really active. She's very mobile when I'm handling her. As you can see, she's kind of moving around and repositioning. She loves to climb. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people should really take into consideration when having a ball python, is that if you offer them the opportunity to climb, they will. And that will really help with the bone and muscle health of your animal.
So many people.
Have you ever been bitten?
By snakes in general, yeah, a handful of times. I've got a blood python that will probably take out, I want to say, we'll probably do her third. We'll do my adult Great Basin gopher snake next, but she's gotten me a couple of times. Nagini here has not. She's gotten pretty close. She really, really, really loves food. It's one of her favorite things is to eat. And so she is always at the ready to take a meal. So I have to actually use a hook to be able to get her out. So that way she doesn't get a hold of my hand, realize that she's not grabbed a hold of food. She's wasted a bunch of energy doing that, and then get stressed and wait for the retaliation of, I bit something but I can't take down, and now it's going to get after me.
And yes, guys, I know what you're thinking when he said blood python. Yes, he's the one that really got me turned on to the blood python that I eventually got. So it's his fault.
Yeah. I know everyone sees the way that she interacts with me and how calm she can be, and
Yeah.
she's grown so much, and everyone's like, "Oh man, I really want one." And I'm like, if you've got a couple of years under your belt and you feel like you're ready, like, do the research, and then if you really feel like you need to have that animal, then go for it. But they are a challenge at times.
When did she eat last?
So she took her last meal on Wednesday. And so at this point, she's got enough of a heft to her to where she'll probably go 2 weeks before her next meal. So I'll give her a lot of time to really digest that meal, break it down, use up some of that nutrition, get it put into a fair amount of growth, and making sure that everything is kind of going where it needs to be, and let her kind of work off some of the fat that's going to be in that meal because it was a rodent. So her next meal will be probably a smaller bird, so like a chicken chick or something like that.
That's what I was going to ask, what she had to eat last time.
Yeah, she had a good sized rat. For her, it was a pretty hefty one. So yeah. She's I mostly base their feeding schedule off of what they eat and how active I've noticed them being throughout the week or between feedings. So if I notice that they are being really, really active, if they've had a good shed or a good growth cycle between meals, and they've gained some noticeable size, and after that meal is completely digested, then I'll offer them a lot of the time a little bit of a heavier meal or a larger meal. If I notice that they're not as active, I might skip a couple of weeks or just offer them a really small meal, so that way they are still getting some of that nutrition, but they're not as high fat content, so that way there's not as much for them to burn off.
Anybody have, and by the way, I forgot to mention that we did talk about questions, Nate and I did, and he said that he'd like to have like one or two out there and then stop and answer a couple questions, but I'm not seeing any so far. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Or
I'm just fascinated.
How many snakes do you have in your collection?
So currently I have 7. It's a relatively small collection. I have 3 of the Great Basin gopher snakes, so that's Pituophis catenifer deserticola. I have the 1 ball python, so that is Python regius. I have a Colombian boa, who is everyone's pride and joy. They love Ofrenda. And that is... where are you going? That is boa constrictor imperator, the Colombian locality. I have a blood python, which is Python brongersmai, and then I have a false water cobra, which is Hydrodynastes gigas.
That water cobra is so cool.
She is so pretty.
And talk about aware of what's going on, and wow.
Yeah, she takes in every little thing, and so does. It's interesting with the blood python, Carmilla, because you can, if you look really closely, like if you're interacting with her in person, you can see her eye moving. But they are so the absolute definition of ambush predator that they refuse to move at certain points that they don't absolutely have to. But I think we can get her put up, and then we'll get our large, I believe, male. I'm going to be having some genetic testing done because it's a little bit less invasive and a little bit, well, it's a lot less invasive because I can use shed skin for it to get him properly sexed and identified for any kind of like color pattern mutation genes or anything like that. I'm getting a batch of skin samples or shed samples sent off to a lab to be analyzed. So that'll make for an interesting video on the TikTok, and I'll grab him real quick. His name is Bullwinkle.
Can you hear me okay?
I hear you.
I was wondering while you're doing that, like if I have, most of my snakes eat rat, well, that's all they eat is rats and mice. So do you just start introducing that to them and assume they're going to take a quail egg or a baby chicken, or how do you do that?
So what I like to do is make sure that they're eating pretty consistently, make sure that they're very comfortable, that they have a really good appetite, and that they're just doing what they need to be as far as taking in food goes. Mr. Bullwinkle, where are you, buddy? You burrowed deep in here somewhere. And once you've pretty well got them established on making sure that they're eating for you, a lot of the time all it takes is just offering them that meal, and they'll take it pretty readily. If it's something, if you have a snake that would at times eat a bird in the wild, so like with this guy here, if I can get him, he's kind of giving me a little bit of a hard time. Come on, buddy.
Sounds like you guys are mud wrestling or something over there. Jamie's asking how much the ball python weighs.
That's a good question. I have a scale somewhere around here, and I don't really go off of the general weight because while it's great that we have raw numbers for our animals as far as how many grams do they weigh versus how long they are and age and things like that, there's a lot of factors that we don't account for when we're basing it sheerly off of length and grams. So when we're only going off the pure weight of the animal, we're not taking into consideration more often than not how much of that animal is muscle, how much of it is bone, how much of it is skin, how much of it is just general hydration in that animal's body versus how much of that is body fat. You can have two animals that are the same length, age, and pretty close to the same weight, but they may be, one might have a whole lot more body fat than the other, and that's going to be a lot less healthy than the animal that mostly has a nice, well-rounded, built-up physique of healthy muscle and bone and skin.
I popped that question up there because I don't think I could remember it all the way to the false water cobra.
New book on false water cobras. I have not. I'm going to have to check that out and see if I can get a copy of that soon.
Okay.
What you got going on here, buddy? You scared of the shit out of that. Come here. So this is the Great Basin gopher snake. This is Bullwinkle. So this is Pituophis catenifer deserticola. And these are a North American colubrid with Nagini, the first snake that I had out. She is an African species. So these guys are from right here in the good old US of A in southern Canada. They have a very wide range all the way from roughly, I want to say, Alberta and going over towards the very southeasternmost edges of British Columbia, all the way down into, I want to say, like California area, Nevada might have some of the Great Basins, Utah has them. So they're a very widely distributed species, or I guess subspecies. Pituophis catenifer is a pretty widely spread species in general, which would include things like a whole bunch of different kinds of gopher snakes and bull snakes. They're also called Henry snakes, chain snakes. They've got a handful of different common names. But these guys are a constricting snake, so they will grab a hold of their prey, they'll wrap around it, give it a nice squeeze. In the wild, these guys are going to be eating everything from small birds to rodents to lizards, maybe even other small snakes. But a lot of rodents and birds are what these guys are going to be taking down. Occasionally, you'll catch one grabbing a hold of a ground or low nesting bird's eggs and get a couple of those down. So that's always pretty cool to see. I have yet to get him to take eggs for me, but I've tried on a couple occasions.
Does he have keeled scales? Are they raised keeled scales?
Yeah, so these guys have a very similar kind of scalation to a lot of other drier climate colubrids. So their scales aren't so heavily keeled like a rattlesnake's, where they appear very dry and they look and feel very rough. These are almost, in a lot of areas, more beaded, especially on the dorsal scalation here along the spine. As you move laterally, they get a little bit flatter and a little bit smoother, but they do have a little bit of a rounded top to them.
Such a beautiful snake.
It really is.
Yeah, these guys are absolutely gorgeous. I've got two really small ones, and they're a little bit flighty still. They're still going through some getting used to with the handling, even though I've had them forever. They are... they're one that takes a little bit to get quite as friendly as this, where he's so used to handling at this point that he's just kind of like, I don't care. It's like I can do things like touch his face, if I could go like that, touch the top of his head, and it doesn't bother him any, because me and him have built up a pretty good relationship.
Yeah, well,
but these guys do oftentimes get mistaken in their natural habitats for or their native ranges for rattlesnakes, because they do have a very similar color and pattern to them. This guy comes to us from the Spokane Valley area. Oh, and he's gonna get up all on the chest here. Come on, buddy. There we go. But these are they're a chunkier colubrid without being super heavily bodied, so like a medium build. Relatively long, fairly lean. They're very muscular, but they're not excessively strong. So even at full size, he's probably got a couple more feet to go before he gets to be the biggest that he can possibly get. But even at that full size, they pose absolutely no danger to any human.
Do you keep him with the other two, or are they all individually kept? Or
so all of my snakes are, because I don't have any very social animals. These guys are mostly solitary, except for during the breeding season and brumation season. So during the time of year when they're going to start bunkering down to overwinter, you'll occasionally find a couple of them in a single burrow, but they try as best they can to kind of stay alone. They'll come together for breeding, and that's kind of about it. Once in a great while, you'll catch two of them fairly close to each other because they're not excessively territorial. But given the opportunity, they'd rather be by themselves for the most part, unless it's mating season. Come on, buddy. Let people see your pretty little handsome face. There you go.
he's really handsome. Almost looks like a little baby's, a young baby snake's face. He's cute.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that these guys are sometimes called bull snakes as well, is because of that very rounded nose.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things that these guys do when they're upset is, if you've really pushed them to the limit, it's usually pretty difficult to get these guys to bite. They obviously can. Anything with a mouth can bite, but these guys are really uninclined to. They will punch, though, so they will leave that mouth closed. They'll lash out forward and hit you with that really blunt tip nose just to kind of scare you and get you to back up.
It would scare me.
They will pose up like rattlesnakes. They'll buzz the tail and loose rocks and leaves and grass and things. They put on a whole show for you.
I talk about a jump scare. That thing jumps in. Dragon Lair said a couple of things. He said he can't touch any of his carpets faces. They're fine with handling, just don't mess with their heads. And he says, I can't remember to go for males battle or combat for the females.
They will kind of push each other around a little bit until one finally gives up. They don't do a ton of of that kind of what do they call that, interspecies sexual combat or what have you, because typically they're pretty widespread. So most of the time a female will kind of come cruising through an area because she really doesn't care whose territory it is. If there's food to be had and there's resources to be had, she's going to get in there and get what she wants. The males will kind of just follow her along and find her. If a couple of males run across each other, they might kind of pose up a little bit. They'll kind of push each other around a little while until one gets tired and decides that it's just not worth the effort, and he'll leave and try to go find somewhere else to be.
It's a really cool snake.
These guys are awesome. I love these guys. They're very calm. They're very active. They love to climb, burrow. They make all kinds of noises out throughout the day. They'll see their own reflection and try to interact with it, or they'll hiss at it, or they just a lot of the time will just randomly hiss for no reason. I'm convinced that he doesn't understand what it's for. So he just lets out these little puffs here and there, but there's never any other signs of stress for him. He just is a little talkative, and he's gotten better as he's gotten older and a whole lot more used to being around people. And me and him have a pretty good bond. If there's other people in the room, then sometimes he'll kind of be a little bit of a showboat. And when I take him outside, so that way he can, when the weather is nice, that way he can get some good enrichment, he will fully act a fool and act like he's a full-blown wild animal, which is kind of amusing because he stops the second that you touch him.
I bet he's fast too.
Yeah, he can get moving with a purpose a lot of the time because I'll kind of just let them cruise around on the ground by themselves. He's pretty good about maintaining a slow enough pace to where I can keep up with them. For the most part in the wild, these guys are a pretty confident snake where if you spot one and they spot you, they will try to mostly rely on that camouflage, because in a lot of the areas where they're living, the patterns and colors that they've got are really going to break up their silhouette against dried leaves and pine cones and all different kinds of debris that's going to be on the ground. So a lot of the time they're just going to kind of try to sit as still as they possibly can, so that way you just don't notice them. But when you do approach them, they'll continue to sit still, and then at the last possible second, they'll either dart off or they'll wait for you to pick them up, and then they'll try to get a hold of you. They'll let you know how they feel about being picked up.
Let's see. Dragon Lair says the one we have in Alabama is called a pine snake, but the same genus.
So that is the southeast, basically, version. So up here, these guys are actually sometimes called a western pine or a northern pine snake because they're part of the Pituopus genus, and they're very visually similar to those guys. All right, buddy. Get on down in there. Come on. There you go.
Apparently there's something in this area, a yellow pine snake, and I think it's just a color variant. I don't know that it's a true morph. But
yeah,
I'm seeing...
I know that we've got the black pine snake, which is just a very unique population of melanistic animals.
I follow the Tennessee snake ID page where people send in pictures on Facebook to the channel, and experts ID them. So it's pretty cool. Bull, gopher, and pines are all the same genus. The killed, I have too many questions, I'm sorry, but I yearn for knowledge. You know that, guys. The keeled scales are to help it climb. Is that, or am I wrong? Or he can't hear me.
Oh, can you hear it?
Ooh, there we go. You brought a little moss with you, but that's okay. Yeah, I know. I know you're dripping down hard. Put that over there for now. So this big, beautiful gal, I'm going to lift her up here in a second once I... Yeah, you're flinchy, I know.
Ooh, the blood python.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
wow.
can just barely see her peeking out. She's a little bit on the nervous side because I've woken her up. But she's remaining calm for me, and we're just going to rub her back a little bit and get her to cool off. a little bit warm today, which makes them a little bit crabby. And she's being fussed with, so she's going to be a little cantankerous and a little bit.
Oh my God, I can't watch. I'm sorry.
She's going right for the carotid.
There we go. Hi, baby. Now, once I get her to kind of realize that we're doing handling and that she's not being fussed with a ton and that she's got nothing to worry about.
She's a sweetheart.
Then she'll be fine.
Yeah, we're going to show everyone what makes you so special, huh?
Look at that face. Wow.
And she is just the sweetest little thing once she realizes that we're just doing some handling and everything's fine, everything's calm. Huh. Yeah, that's a good girl. Nice good baby. Yeah.
I handled
So
mine more than
Bronner's mice. So this is a large Southeast Asian species of short-tailed python. These guys are really closely related to what we would also call Sumatran short-tails, black bloods, Malaysian short-tails. That whole kind of area has very similar related subspecies of these guys, or species, and I want to say maybe one subspecies of these guys.
Wow.
These guys are a very relatively cool temperature, very high humidity, lots of airflow. They're one of only a handful of snakes that will actually release a lot of liquid urine, which can make their husbandry a little bit difficult because you've got to have really good airflow in their enclosure while still keeping it relatively humid in there. So definitely not a beginner species, not something that's super easy. They are voracious eaters, and they are excessively intelligent. They are almost like reticulated pythons in their level of intelligence and recognition of their owners, the people that they've set a bond with. They have a tendency to be overweight, so she gets a lot of bird feeders, which she really, really loves. She goes absolutely crazy for birds, and then she's a little bit more relaxed when it comes to rodents.
Wow, look at that. Gorgeous.
Very pretty. Very
Dragon
good.
Laird's asking me if I was going to work mine to be like that. I actually picked her up and held her to move her to a larger tank yesterday, Patrick, and she did well. And she really, really showed how smart she was. She explored every inch of the tank once she was in there, everything. She moved the wood, real heavy wood. She moved that stuff around like she wanted it. So she didn't try to bite me. She watched me real close, but
yeah, and snakes like this are a good kind of, I guess, a segue in a way to talk about why it's important to offer bird feeders instead of just rodents to the animals that can have them. For birds, they're going to be a much leaner protein than a lot of rodents. They also have typically either larger bones and or the bones that they have are going to be very hollow. They're all hollow and typically really porous, which means that those stomach acids can really get down into that bone and start to break it down a lot easier. And that will make things like calcium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, any kind of minerals that these guys are going to need are going to be a lot more readily available to them in their digestive system because of how much easier those bones are to break down. And it also means that they can digest that animal more completely, which is really nice when you're feeding these bigger snakes, these whole prey items, and especially when they have a tendency to get obese like these guys do, because they love to eat. And I know that a lot of people love to show their animals that they love them by letting them eat, but it's really easy to overfeed these guys. It's really easy to have a very unhealthy, overweight snake. And unfortunately, a lot of people lose these guys before they ever reach their full size potential or even get very old.
well, how would you know if it's overweight? Mine is bigger around than that, but I don't think a whole lot longer.
Yeah, so one of the things that you'll want to do is occasionally when you can get them to this calm point where you can kind of really fuss with them is get a good look down that spine. You're looking for the same kind of situation that you'd be looking for with a ball python or a lot of other pythons even, where these guys should have a very gentle peak to the spine with a nice rounded edge on either side going down into that kind of triangular or almost pyramid shape. They are a little bit chunkier than ball pythons, but not by a lot. So if they get a little bit wide in the sides, it's not terrible. But what you don't want to see is a bunch of squishy, flabby, like she's got a little bit of, I can get a little bit of a pinch in there. We can also check their hydration like this too. So this is another really important thing to do every now and again when you're working your snakes, is just kind of give it a little pinch. And what we can see is that there's a lot of muscle in there. We can see that most of this is pretty firm and that skin is nice and elastic. As soon as it's let go, it immediately goes right back to where it was. There's no overhang. It doesn't kind of sit where it was. We can feel just all the way down that like dorsal side of her body is just absolute pure muscle. As we start to go lateral, we see a little bit more of that body fat. And then as we get to the ventral side, which is the stomach here, you can feel that it's a little bit softer, but there's still some abdominal muscle in there. So this would be what I would consider a very healthy weight for an animal this size. You can also see how you can see a little bit of a groove down her side.
Yeah.
Just the tiniest little groove, and that's just the muscle separation between the lateral and ventral muscles and her dorsal muscles. So if you're seeing a good amount of like, it's a nice kind of rounded over triangle, you can see that muscular groove at certain angles. It shouldn't be super deep. You're not looking for a trench on these guys because they do need to maintain some level of body fat higher than something like a reticulated python or a Burmese python, or even a lot of like the Morelia species of pythons. But these guys are going to have, just a little bit of a transition to where you can there we go. See a little bit of definition here between lateral and dorsal muscular systems. And I mean, there's a ton of muscles that go in here, but those are the two main groups that you get into that degree of separation in.
Yeah, Patrick's saying they short tails and bloods aren't very active, so they can get fat quickly. And yeah, sometimes mine doesn't move for a week. She just sits there.
So these guys are one of the snakes where a lot of people that start getting into the really hot stuff, when they want to get into the Bitis genus, this is one of the snakes that's not super uncommon for them to get, because these guys are the masters of keeping their muscles healthy by sitting completely still. So while they're in a very specific position without actually having to move, they can optionally flex and hold muscles into position and alternate those all up and down their body without actually having to physically move. So visually, you'll never see that animal move, but she is working her muscles as she sits still for sometimes months at a time. These guys are very similar to the Gaboon Viper, where they will sit in the same spot for as long as it takes for them to get a hold of something like a micro deer or small birds, rats, rodents, whatever it is that they need to get a hold of, anything that's food size that comes within range. These guys are going to sit and wait for the most opportune possible time. They'll grab it. They have a ferocious feeding response sometimes, so it's not uncommon to see them really get some airtime as they're getting up there, and they will hit pretty hard for a python. And she's just starting to get those adult colors in too, so she's going to start turning real maroon and real red here pretty soon, which is going to be really cool.
Could you come by and pinch mine and see if she's fat or not? I think she is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of the time what you can do is just kind of take your thumb, so you'll be able to see the spine pretty easy. So you put your thumb on the spine, just kind of run it down. You just barely want to be able to feel that right about there. So a little higher than halfway, you'll feel the tiniest little groove. So then once you kind of feel that, you get a better idea of kind of where to look, when she's straightened out, or if she's flexing certain parts of her body, where that groove is going to show up more. You can kind of twist and turn around them. Don't twist and turn them, otherwise they might turn back on you and tell you what they think about it.
Oh.
But you'll be able to kind of maneuver around them and be able to see roughly where that muscle is and really get a good idea of their weight. And these guys are excessive. They're very heavy. So even though they only get to about 6 and 7 feet, some of them will get to around about the 8-foot mark. they are going to weigh probably at that size more than a 16 or 20 foot reticulated python that's doing really well and really healthy. These guys are a very heavy snake.
This is amazing to watch this, because this is what all the people that are, like you say, wanting to go to this level are talking about, how wicked they are and how they will bite, and on and on and on. But that's what made me hesitate so long on getting the one I did. I would never do that.
And they are cantankerous. That first year can be really rough with these guys. They're very, even though they're very intelligent, when they're really young, they're relatively small, and they're a very easy prey target animal for most predators. So they have to kind of have that almost like a chihuahua, or what you would typically see with most chihuahuas, of that kind of little man syndrome, where they're absolutely ready to post up at you at a minute's notice. They do have some pretty gnarly teeth. Most pythons have a little bit more of a diagonal or a diamond shaped cross section to their tooth, where there's kind of a leading edge on both sides of it, the front and the back. And that makes it much easier for them to lacerate if they are to grab a hold of you, even if it's defensively and they go to pull back, or if you pull back as they're pulling back, you can really cut yourself pretty good on their teeth.
Mm.
But if you work with these guys really gently, really slowly, really patiently, just take your time, learn their body language, learn what they do and don't like, you can get to the point where you can get nose to nose with her like this, and it doesn't bother her.
Mm.
And you're just a sweet little baby, huh?
Amazing.
Good girl.
Has she ever bitten you?
Yeah, she has gotten me on the hands a couple of times, and it's almost always when it's really warm in here and I go to take her out of the enclosure. Once she's out of the enclosure, I just kind of sit real still, real quiet, real calm for like a minute or two, and then she realizes that she's being held. She calms right down. She doesn't prefer to be standing like this, like I am right now. A lot of the time I'll get her low to the ground or to a table or just anywhere where I can get low with her. And she's perfectly content to just sit against my body like this while we're laying down. So if you want a large snake that's larger than a ball python that gives you a little bit of a challenge and really makes you earn that bond, these guys are great. And then they're great snugglers once they've all gotten all settled in and you got all that piss and vinegar out of their system. But she is just a big snuggle baby. She's super calm. She doesn't like to go outside. I've tried taking her outside a couple of times for some natural UVB and all that. She hates it. She's like, I don't belong out here, man. I'm put me in that house, back in my box of dirt.
Yeah, they like kind of a little bit damp, like caves or under the edge of a ledge or something. So I try not to put
these
any.
guys are typically going to be in like kind of marshy areas where they're going to be able to pick off anything from small water fowl to rats, like nutria and things like that. Whatever kind of animals are going to be in that area, these guys will readily take down.
She's gorgeous.
For a hot minute too, I was debating whether or not if I was going to be excited for her to turn like deep red. And now that she's starting to, I think it's just a little bit more fitting for her. I think she's going to be absolutely gorgeous by the time she comes out with all of her big girl colors.
And how old are they when that happens?
I love the color she is right now.
Yeah, she used to be a lot more of a caramely color, so almost a little bit closer to these lighter colors.
Yeah.
All the way down in these areas that are starting to get that kind of almost rusty brown. And eventually she'll turn like a cherry wood mahogany red. Wow. So like a deeper red than my flannel here.
Oh, wow.
And that's the primary reason that we call these guys blood pythons or red bloods or true bloods or any of that kind of stuff, is because they get that as adults. They tend to have a very rich, deep red color. And it's really, really cool.
Well, now mine is supposed to be just now 3 years old, and she was bought as a little, a new hatchling, I guess, from my local pet store, and the man had to move or something and brought her back. And I saw videos that he set the store on her of him handling her and holding her and having her outside, and then the store owner handled her. But so I know that she's used to it. But she's about that same color. But she's 3, I think they said. Yeah, 3. Very close to that color.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to the genetics too. And I want to say that at this point she's about 3 too.
Okay.
She's starting to really pack on some size. I was able to actually reconnect with the breeder that produced her and that I bought her from, and showed him some pictures of her, and he was quite impressed with how far along she's come and how good she looks, how muscular she is. He was like, dude, I am pretty impressed with the care that you've taken, how well you've taken care of her for the last couple of years. And he's like, you've done a really good job with her, and she looks like she's super happy.
Chattanooga Ed, that's my good buddy from nearby here, asking, will that snake ambush things from underwater? That's a good question, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, if they're in an area where they're mostly covered up with water and something comes by to take a drink, or if they're like hanging out in a puddle or something like that, they will absolutely take a shot at it.
Oh, wow.
They're an absolute ambush predator, so they'll sit as still as humanly possible. If they don't have to move, they won't. So if they end up in a situation where even if they're going for water to soak themselves or something, dried blood color. That's a great way to put it. That is an excellent way to put that. Yeah, it's like a dry blood color. But these guys, yeah, if they're in water and something looks tasty to them and it's within striking range, they'll take a shot at it. They also have this really cool adaptation. So they have labial heat pits on the front, which with hers, they're kind of a slit. They're like slits in her lip. So they're very narrow. You can just barely make them out. But her nostrils open towards the back of her head. So that way when she's breathing, she's not breathing on what she's going to strike if it's really close to her face. And so that way she's not kind of messing with her own thermal reception organs there. If she's particularly warm and breathing out in front of her, her heat pits are going to pick that up and make it a little bit more difficult for her to see what she's going after.
Wow.
Like if you put your thumb on the back of her head long enough, you'll feel her breathing. You'll feel that little gust of cold air come flying up and hit you in the thumb.
Oh yeah, it would be cold. Amazing.
All right, you ready? You want to go back into your jar of dirt? She is like the most expensive box of dirt that I have to feed because she is burrowed and hiding about probably 98% of the time.
Yeah.
So you look into her enclosure and you can't see anything. And then you go to put food in there, or if you accidentally put your hand too far in there without making sure that you know where she is, you'll all of a sudden see her head come flying up and grab food or almost get you in the hand, or she'll throw a coil out to hit you in the hand to let you know to back off because she's not in the mood.
They're really hard to see in plain sight. I mean, I've been surprised so many times. I'm like, where is her head? And it's right there.
Yeah, if these guys are in a good leaf litter and moss and things like that, it's really hard to see them when they're young. Get in there, baby. Oh, closed up and locked in.
I'm going to add some shells in my...
And then now we'll get the big baby. Big baby. Come up, say hi to people.
The big baby. Oh, wow.
Big, I'm getting ready.
I know. I just put my feet up in the chair.
Good job. Ooh, careful with my finger. Careful with my finger.
Uh-oh.
You don't gotta squeeze like that. There you go.
Oh, wow.
So this is my Colombian boa.
Wow.
This is boa constrictor imperator. She's currently just absolutely putting the squeeze on my wrist. This is Ofrenda. And she is just a huge just one giant muscle. This snake is so strong
So why is she putting the squeeze on your wrist? Is she trying to tell you that she's uncomfortable, or is she just trying to let you
No,
know
she's
that
just trying to make sure that she doesn't fall.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
think a lot of the time she doesn't quite realize how strong she is, and the fact that I feel things in my arms. Because if she gets any kind of nervous or anything like that, she just tightens that grip a little bit.
Right.
She's usually very gentle. It's not enough to hurt, but I'm always very aware if like she's got part of her coil wrapped around a thumb or my wrist or anything that's a little bit sensitive, because she is so strong that like if she really wanted to and she was wrapped around certain parts of my hand or wrist, she could probably squeeze down and do some serious damage.
Oh, wow.
But she is just the most gentle that I've ever seen in my entire life. I can touch her face, her lips, her eyes. Yeah, you like the scratches. Do you hook train? Yes. So I use my hook. With her, I don't always use the hook because she's really good about stopping if she approaches my hand before she tries to mistake it for food and try to take a chunk out of me. But everybody else, I at least do tap training. So if there is enough of them laid out to where I can safely get to their back part of their body without getting too close to their face or within striking range, I'll just give them a gentle little rub down on their back to let them know, hey, I'm coming in here. You're not getting food. You know, you're not going to be getting something to eat. So don't start lashing out and freaking out. And they immediately will relax. They'll let me pick them up. She loves cameras. She loves phones. So she's going to get right up in you guys' business and introduce
What is
herself.
that? Why do they do that? A couple of mine do that, or they'll sit and stare at the phone like a whole stream.
So I think that a lot of it comes down to the autofocus that happens with a lot of cameras nowadays. So they can just barely see that the little mechanisms of the lens moving in there. And I think it just really gets their attention.
Oh,
And
wow.
she is such a curious animal that like anything that's new, she has to go touch it. She's got to touch it, smell it, feel it.
He just calling me Bobby Boy. Sorry.
Oh, right on. Yeah, you guys can see these lines, these grooves and ripples in her body. Those are all different muscle groups that are all flexing and shifting. And if snakes could have like 6-pack abs or 12-pack abs, that would be what she has going on. She is super, super, super muscular. She's extremely strong. But even with being that strong and that muscular, she is probably one of the most gentle snakes that I've ever seen.
Really?
Is she a red-tailed boa?
Yeah, so one of the common names for these guys is redtail or Colombian redtail. There's a lot of different kinds of boa constrictor. And in some circles, taxonomically, they've started to remove for some of them the constrictor part of it and just move it straight to boa imperator, or boa constrictor, or boa constrictor longicauda, or what have you. So taxonomically speaking, these guys are a nightmare. I don't like getting into the taxonomy of it. And just to save myself from catching flack from like the real serious boa people, whenever somebody asks if she's a redtail, I just say, yeah, she's a Colombian, you know, just kind of try to sidestep all of the drama. But these guys make a really fantastic companion animal. They really, really, really do well with just learning a person. They eat almost every single time you offer them food. I don't think she's ever refused a meal from me.
Oh.
So I've got to really watch when I feed her, so that way she maintains this beautiful physique here.
How long is she?
That's a good question. I want to say that she's got to be closing in on 5 foot here pretty soon if she's not at 5 foot. So she's a sizable animal. And the biggest problem that we see with boas is power feeding. So that is feeding that animal on a schedule that's really super frequent, which helps to promote super fast growth, but it also doesn't allow for slow, healthy development of bones and muscle tissue. So what you see is these animals that are absolutely massive at really young ages. So there are some boas out there. She's about 5 years old. There are some animals out there that are the same age as her, but almost twice the size.
Yeah, it's the same with some fish. People try to power grow them. We're super fast, and they don't have time to internally mature.
Yep. Yeah, and it just dramatically shortens their lifespan. I mean, with a good healthy boa like this, you should be seeing anywhere from 25 to like 35 years. And a lot of people are getting like 15, maybe 20. Some of them that are power fed early on and then either get rehomed to someone that doesn't power feed, or the keeper realizes that they're making a horrid mistake with their animal and finally backs off of power feeding. You might see like closer to the 25-year mark. But really with these guys, it's just a matter of, make sure that they maintain a nice, square, muscular physique. So like you'll see that with her, that her body it's very flat on the dorsal side and very flat on the side. So she's almost built like a steel girder, where she's just boxy and square from her head all the way down to about just before the caudal area or her tail, which she currently has just squeezed down on my fingers because she's trying not to fall. And she doesn't like to let go of my hand. She is like a child. When I take her outside to get her outdoor enrichment, half of the time before she will go down to the ground of her own and kind of cruise around and investigate things, she has to hold on to my hand like this to some degree until she feels confident that the area is safe for her to just kind of slide off.
Bless her.
Yep. Yeah. Power feeding, I can't bring myself to do it. I would love to see her get absolutely massive. And I think that she will be a very large adult when she reaches, probably 10 years old. She'll probably be, 8 to 9 feet long and reach her full size potential within around about that time frame, because she's put on just under a foot a year, which is a pretty good, healthy growth rate for these guys. Hi. Did you want kisses?
Oh,
Yeah, she is just an absolute sweetheart. She loves dogs. Anytime she sees a dog, she wants to like lower herself down and check out what the dog is. And hi.
We're talking about her holding on. Something that the shopkeeper, when I got her, warned me about, and then I researched it, and he was right, is that the big snake you just had out, Bob, your memory.
Oh, the blood
Python. Yeah, when I was getting her, he said, "No, these are not arboreal at all, like ball pythons. They won't hold on. They'll just fall out of your arms. They just don't have that sense to, they're used to being flat." So, and I've found that she doesn't climb at all. She stays down the bottom and in the litter. So.
Yeah, with bloods, they are terrible about hanging on. I mean, they'll try a little bit, but they're not very good at it because they're just not built for that.
Right.
Ball pythons are a little bit better, especially if they have stuff to climb on in their enclosure and they maintain a relatively lean and muscular and more athletic physique. Then they're pretty good about holding on. Boas are a semi-arboreal snake, and that's part of the reason too that you don't want to power feed them and get them super fat and chunky and heavy and huge too quick, is because you want them to be able to do things like this, like pull themselves up and she can, from about this point where she's connected to my arm, she can shoot herself straight out and maintain that in just a straight, stiff, rigid bar until she can get a hold of something to transfer over to. So these guys are extremely strong. They're very athletic. They're really nice and active without being super fast. So even at her trying to really book it, which she doesn't do super often, but even at her fast, it's still pretty maintainable speed. The strike speed is pretty quick, and they do hit pretty hard. So taking an accidental food response bite from one of these guys is a bad time, just because of how hard they hit, and they are very tenacious when it comes to food. But these guys are really good about taking a variety of feeders for you. So these guys can eat everything from birds to rodents to rabbits, frogs, lizards. I want to say that they can eat fish, but I don't really know anyone that feeds their boa constrictors fish. But pretty much all of the others, they can eat snakes, they can eat lizards, they can eat frogs and birds and rats, mice, African soft furs, appropriately sized rabbits, all different kind of stuff that you can feed these guys.
Really a
And
beautiful.
because they're voracious eaters, they will almost every single time you offer them something, even if it's something completely new, they'll just take it right from you without any problems, without any muss or fuss. It might take them a second to sniff at it to make sure that it's something that should be on the menu for them, because they are pretty cognizant of what is and is not food. So like when I reach into her enclosure, even if her face is right next to my hand, she will zoom up to it pretty quick, but she then stops and she takes a good couple of deep breaths through the nose, and then she'll use her tongue as well to pick up some of those chemo signals and kind of let her know, you know, this isn't food, this is dad, don't chomp down. And then she likes to do stuff like this. So sometimes she will just sit for a good 20-30 minutes on the top of my head, checking out the top of the doorway. Her favorite thing in the world is, and I'm not going to let her have it because otherwise she won't go back in for me, the feather on this hat. She will sit there and she rubs her face down the length of it. I've got a video of that on the TikTok page. But very, very intelligent animals if you allow them to be, by giving them enrichment and interacting with them, and just kind of let them explore things safely. They're very clingy. Once they bond to you, they are yours forever. You are their person. They are your snake. They do well socially as far as with other people, but more often than not, like, they don't care about somebody else. They just want their particular person. You can see how far she's stretching right now.
Yeah. Wow.
It's an extremely strong snake. But that's why it's really important to give these guys a varied diet so that you can maintain this really good muscle health, this good physique. Let them get some exercise. That will help with not only their muscles, but with their bones. So between diet and exercise is really important for these guys.
You never hear keepers or breeders talk about the skeletal strength. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's for lack of caring. I think that for the most part we just simplify everything because it's just easier to put your snake in a container that you've zeroed out on your scale and go, okay, this animal is X amount of grams and it's this old and it's this length and blah blah blah. So they're still trying to put some level of work into it. But when we think about it, even our own body mass index that we use for humans medically, how much of that weight that we're talking about for someone that's 6'2", how much of that should be muscle? How much of that should be fat? How much of that should be water content? Right. You know, how much of that should be a meal that's still being digested? So that's one of the reasons that I just don't use a scale to measure these guys, really. You can do all of it visually if you really know what you're doing. And that can take quite a while, but the raw numbers aren't necessarily, you know, it's not the gospel. You can visually check your animal and see, you know, good muscle striations here. You can see those groups flexing and firing off. You can see that she's got a good solid structure here. And if you're to touch her, it almost feels like a textured piece of stone, almost. Like it's so muscular. There's just a little bit of give in areas where she's not immediately flexing or using those muscles. So if she's flexing them on this side and you touch over here, there's more give, but there's just enough body fat to where if she were to have to skip like a month or two of eating, she would be completely and totally fine. She would be able to last a month or two to get to another meal. And that's really what I strive for with my feeding with these guys, is to make sure that they have enough body fat at any given point in time that if something were to happen, just like it would in nature, where these guys might have a couple of months where they can't eat, or they're only going to be able to take really small meals that aren't going to be necessarily as nutritionally dense as what they need, they could survive off of that for a good long time. Yeah.
Awesome.
You're the prettiest baby. Everyone loves you.
That was the TikTok video that I was telling you how fast the Sam the mod is, Huawei is. Within 30
I saw
seconds,
that.
he had your link up there for that. So thanks, Sam.
That is absolutely great work.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, you can just see how muscly she is and how much control she has over it. Because if I touch anywhere on that little area right between the scutes and the lateral scales, she just pulls it in immediately, and it's kind of a little bit ticklish.
So that's called scutes, like on a turtle?
Yeah, so the
Huh.
ventral scales on these guys are scutes, and then you've got your dorsal scalation, which for these guys, it's pretty much all the way the same all the way around, even at the top of their head. They don't have really large, broad rostral scales or head scales or anything like that. It's all kind of pretty consistently small, smooth, flat scales all the way down the body until you get to the scutes here. And then it's these much narrower but wider, narrow and wide scales that they use to climb. They use it to pull themselves along.
Oh, yeah. She looks like two snakes when she wraps her tail around by her body. Two different snakes almost.
Right. Yeah, that caudal coloration is just absolutely fantastic. There's been some suggestion that the brighter colored tails on these guys might be a form of caudal luring, in more of a passive respect, that when they're in a low-hanging tree or shrub in the wild, that bright colored tail being closer to the ground might attract like small birds, certain kind of fruit-eating animals where they can really, lash down and nail them. These guys will eat everything from monkeys in the wild to baby capybara. I'm pretty sure the largest ones might be able to take down, or guinea pigs and birds of all different kinds, parrots, toucans, kind of whatever. They're almost a generalist. There's a few things that they really don't eat typically, like fish. I don't think that they're going to be eating a lot of that in the wild, but they're an absolute garbage disposal of the snake room. Where if she hasn't been eating super heavy and she's being really active, and somebody else decides that they don't want to eat that week, a lot of the time she ends up picking up an extra snack here and there.
Beautiful.
Which for these guys is fine. I mean, you can give them an extra snack here and there, but for the most part, you just want to kind of keep them on a pretty good schedule so that you keep this kind of stuff going. So you can see all that muscle in there. And again, the skin is nice and taut. It goes right back where it's supposed to. She's using her ribs to kind of kick my fingers away.
Yeah.
And use it as a place to push off so she can continue to wrap herself around the back of my neck here. With these guys, handling them, it is really important that you don't let them wrap around the front of your neck. And if they are on the back of your neck especially, this is where a lot of the problem happens, especially with the full-grown adults that are really large. They are very strong, so it's always best to try to keep them as much as humanly possible on the arms and shoulders. So right here, reposition here, and then the forearms, wrist, and hands. Just because these guys are strong enough to where if she were to wrap herself around the back of my neck, even if it was just in a zigzag formation, kind of like this, and she were to squeeze down on the back of my neck, there is a potential that she could, at the very least, cause some pretty serious pain.
Oh my!
They're just a very strong snake, so it's best to keep them mostly off of the neck for the most part. I don't ever have any issues with her, and if she's on my neck and shoulders, all I have to do is just touch her side like that, and she'll loosen up and let go. But not all of them are going to take to that, and not all of them are going to react that way when you try to get them to scoot away from your most sensitive areas.
There's a case in the news right now. I don't know how recently it happened, but it's a sheriff or something somewhere, and he had pet snakes and snakes that he sold and all that, and he actually rented a house across the street, and he would, I guess, sublet out a room for this lady he knew. Anyway, and she could come and go and feed her snakes and touch his and visit, but she got one of his big snakes out. and it overpowered her. It asphyxiated her. So, but
Oh,
all
my.
kinds of things because he didn't have permits and stuff like that. So it's really an interesting case. So,
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate thing with those. So I always go by the rule of if it's more snake than you can safely handle by yourself, then just always have another person in the room, at least within earshot. And typically, the general rule of thumb is that anything over about 6.5 feet starts to get into the territory where you want to start having another person in there, if it's specifically a constrictor snake. If it's a venomous snake, then obviously that's a whole other situation where no matter what, you should have somebody within earshot. But if it's a large constrictor like these guys, even where these guys aren't giant snakes, they're not massive. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, they should get up to 13, 14, 15 feet. Realistically, they're going to cap out at around about 8 or 9 feet. And that's with a really good diet, really good nutrition, diet, exercise, proper care, slow grown. They're going to get to around about that 8-9 foot mark for large females. And that's probably about it. Males, you're going to see around 6.5, 7. And like for particularly large males, you may even see like a 7.5.
that lady's last name was Hurst, like Patty Hearst, but it's not Patty. So if somebody wants to Google it, Hurst.
And that might be something to check out. And then for the last snake, we'll move on to everyone's favorite, the false water cobra. So I'm going to try to get her put away. And this is going to take me a minute because she's clingy and she has about a 20-minute minimum that she wants to be out. She'd prefer more, but I have to keep her out for at least 15, 20 minutes or she fights me on it.
Oh, it was a 14-foot retic. Dragon Lair's familiar with it. Yeah, she got it out alone. And the man that was renting the building noticed her truck over there, but then she didn't come out or something. He went in and found her. But can you imagine being killed by a snake?
Nope.
And it makes me wonder. I've got a gun. I mean, wouldn't you shoot it before you let it choke you to death? I mean, I don't know.
If you have a gun, a lot of people don't have. They're not like set
I
up.
know, but everybody's got a kitchen knife, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I just sometimes I wonder. Of course, not being in the situation, but I don't know. That's a big snake, 14 foot. Jesus, twice as long as I am tall.
I think I'll stick with my hognose.
Yeah, there you go.
They don't get very
I'm going to
big.
get the falsie and I'm going to bring her in here. So I will be right back.
Did he say he was going to get falsies?
Yeah, he did say falsies.
I know. Yeah, if anybody needs to go, I know we've gone over an hour, so if anybody needs to go, that's
I
fine.
do. John is texting me. I feel bad, but I got to run.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll tell him you had to go. No worries.
All right.
Thanks, Susie.
Thanks.
Bye. Pam, are you still there? I guess Pam already went.
Oh no, I'm here.
Okay. With him blown up, I can't see. This is the coolest one. The snake is so cool. Or I think it is. It wrapped her neck. It cut off blood flow to the brain, and she passed out first. Yeah. I guess the trick is to, before it gets to jump on you, get to jump on it. But that's what they do, That's it. Yeah. Laura Hurst. Yeah. It's really a sad story. One story I read is like they told it like first person, like they were witnessing it or something. So I made the mistake of going in a big channel and saying, I just saw this video and they had big snakes out, and they're like, we're not going to say that. Okay.
Okay, so a little bit of a disclaimer for those that don't know anything about snakes, especially in the audience that might be thinking about once they see her trying to get one of their own. I do have a very thick pair of gloves, so if she starts to get rowdy on me, I'm going to be putting on a glove and working to get her onto the gloved hand so that I can then glove my other hand and then safely handle her. This is a venomous snake. It is mild venom, but even with species of any animal that is considered mildly venomous, there is a lot of individual reactions that can happen. So you can have, 3 people get bitten or stung by the same individual or the same species, and each one of them may react a little bit differently depending on kind of their own unique individual biology. So it's very important to work safely with these animals. Typically, this venom is not one that is particularly dangerous to most people, but you never know when you're going to have a really bad reaction. And I always tell people that if you get bitten by one of these guys the right way to where you get envenomated, it's more than likely going to ruin your day, and it absolutely could ruin your week. So that being said, this is Hydrodynastes gigas. And she is just a tiny little baby, and she will get so much larger than this as she ages and grows up a little bit. This is a South American rear-fanged colubrid. So she will get probably, based on her mom size, I would say about like 9-ish feet long. So a very large, heavy-bodied snake. And I was able to get this one because of Mrs. Mandy Miller there that was able to find the breeder and get me in contact with him so that way I could get this absolutely stunning animal. And if she'll be so gracious as to show us her neck, they have this absolutely wonderful ventral pattern that fades up into that beautiful yellowish cream-colored chin, and then the little raccoon mask there. So these guys are absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful animals, and their eyes are super cool. They're extremely intelligent. They're very, very, very interactive, very smart, very fast moving. The reason that they're called a false water cobra is because of their visual similarity to the banded water cobra, which is a species of actual cobra. And the nausea, I want to say that that's a genus, and those are an elapid, whereas these guys are a colubrid. These guys do have venom, though. It is a very mild hemotoxin. There is some discussion still ongoing about the toxicity of that venom, whether or not it's actually all that toxic or not, or if it is very potent venom, and it's the delivery system, the low pressure delivery system that they have, that makes it not quite as bad as an actual cobra or a rattlesnake. But it is a hemotoxin, so it causes things like extreme swelling, localized pain, headaches, diarrhea, all sorts of just nasty, nasty stuff. Definitely not one that you want to get bitten by. But typically, she's really good. She has had at least one moment where she tried to go after me and had a little bit of a very defensive reaction to being handled. We were outside, and I think she got a whiff of something that just kind of freaked her out. Well, you got something on your nose, babe. I'm trying to get that off you here.
Are they rear-fanged?
Yeah, so she is a rear-fanged venomous snake, so her enlarged teeth that are going to be the primary delivery system for the venom. She's kind of getting agitated with me a little bit because I touched her face. They're going to be just behind. If I can get her to, she's going to act a fool a little bit. They're just behind the eye there.
Okay.
So in the mouth, there's going to be an enlarged tooth with a nice groove in it, and that's going to be the way that they deliver venom into their prey. She's just kind of cautiously moving for me now a little bit, so we're just going to kind of be real gentle. She's not super active when I hold her because she was only a few weeks old when I got her, so she is still very, very young. She is just now, she's going to be 3 months old here pretty soon. So a couple of days, she's going to be 3 months old.
That's solid.
Feeding to flatten that neck out too and make an absolutely terrifying little hood. I mean, when that thing pops out, it's really cool looking, but knowing that that is a stressed out animal that could start acting really defensively is it's a little bit nerve wracking. going to be good today.
So
Yeah.
she is an actual cobra, but mimics another cobra that's more
So
potent.
cobras are part of the elapid. I want to say that that's like family or something, maybe subfamily or some such, maybe not clade. But the group that cobras belong to is going to be elapid. So that's going to be your cobras, crates. I don't like the way that you're looking at my thumb. There we go. We'll just tuck that up underneath you so you can't get to it. It's going to be your cobras, crates, sea snakes, coral snakes, and I feel like I'm missing one. King cobras, because they're not a true cobra either. They're their own genus. But these guys are colubrids. So these guys are actually more closely related to garter snakes, which are a rear-fanged venomous snake. Hognose snakes, which are a rear-fanged venomous snake. Mambas, that's the other elapid. Thank you. Knew I was forgetting one. But these guys are more closely related to like the Great Basin gopher snakes even that I have in here than they are to cobras. The really cool thing about the hood with these guys is that they are from South America, which has no native cobras. Cobras don't live in the New World, but they do live in the Old World. So the reason that these guys hood up is not because of cobras, but because of the same reason that cobras hood up. So it's just to make them look larger, more imposing, more intimidating, and scarier to something that might want to, think about messing with them and try to take a bite out of them. So that would be what we call convergent evolution, whereas if you go to like China and you find a Chinese false cobra, or Egypt and find an Egyptian false cobra, those are going to be doing what we call Batesian mimicry, which is adaptations that mimic or are very similar to animals that are more dangerous than they are. So looking like a venomous snake when you're not. So like Great Basin gopher snakes are a great example of Batesian, and I want to not Malarian mimicry. I want to say is like plants and such, but Batesian mimicry where they will often defensively mimic a rattlesnake to get stuff to back off of them. Whereas these guys do it just because that hood makes them look larger. It makes them look more imposing. It makes them look much more threatening than what they typically would be. So that's a really cool example of the differences between Batesian mimicry and don't you get sassy with me, and just convergent evolution, where evolution for these guys found the same answer that cobras came to.
Wow.
Nutrition for these guys is going to be really important. They are very prone to getting overweight. Even though they're a very active animal and they have to eat very frequently, it's best to try to give them a highly varied diet, because in South America, they are an absolute generalist. They will eat everything from, well, your jets, you're the one that did it. I didn't do nothing. They're absolutely a generalist because they will eat everything from fish to frogs to birds to rodents, and kind of everything in between at different areas and stages of their life, and depending on what's available. I see you puffing that neck up, man. I'm gonna need you to relax a little bit, or I'm gonna have to get a glove. I think we're gonna put on a glove preemptively just because she's getting a little bit. She's starting to warm up. She was on the cool side of her enclosure. And as she warms up and as she's getting a little bit rowdy on me, I don't want her getting kind of... Oh, don't want her getting too rowdy.
Gophers spread their necks too. It's just vertices rather than horizontal.
Yep. So they'll kind of flatten their neck more than widen it.
I haven't noticed mine doing that.
Yeah, these guys will flatten their neck out from side to side to make a hood, just like a cobra would. She's kind of putting a little bit of air into her neck and puffing it up. And we're just going to kind of get another glove ready to go, just in case she wants to be a little butthole. There we go.
She was looking toward us a while ago. It looked like her neck was like ready to throw a javelin or something.
Yeah, she's got that curve in there. You can see that it's kind of puffy.
Yeah.
where it wasn't quite as thick looking before. So she's just a little bit agitated. She's giving me a little bit of flack. She's trying to give me just a little bit of a warning to let me know that she is kind of amped up. She's a little bit nervous, which is fine. She has not been in this room before because she is still in quarantine, and she's just at the point where she can start coming in here now because she's been in quarantine for a few months. So we'll take the gloves off now because she's calming down. But with the smell of other snakes in here and just it being a different room, different scenery, different lighting, that's enough to kind of set them off a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, these guys will eat a ton of different things, so it's important when we keep these guys in captivity to offer them things like frogs, fish, organ meat from like larger meals like chicken or even beef heart or beef liver, things like that, to make sure that they're getting a good balance of vitamins, minerals, lean proteins, specific kinds of fats and fatty acids, all those kinds of things that will help make sure that they've got good, strong bones, because their bones are relatively lightly built. They're not quite as densely built as like Ofrenda would be, or any of the pythons that I have. Those guys are going to have much thicker, more robust bones. And for a colubrid, these guys are really heavily built. So compared to a gopher snake, a corn snake, a bull snake of similar size, their bones are going to be pretty chunky and dense. But just in general, they're not super, super dense, super chunky bones. So it's really important to make sure that they've got a good balance of vitamins, minerals, and everything that they could possibly need to maintain healthy bones, muscle, tissue, organs, skin, eyes, the whole nine.
I saw a video of her when not long after you got her, and you were relieved that she finally ate, that she had to go over and take the mouse after you laid it down.
Yeah, so she, for whatever reason, is like, when it comes to her food, she's a pacifist. When she gets to a certain level of agitation, she is all about the violence. She has nothing but pure rage bottled up into a little teeny tiny body.
Wow.
Yeah, with her food, she doesn't like to take it off the tongs yet. She prefers that I just lay it down in the enclosure, usually on the warm side, and just kind of let it sit, and then she'll go and collect it when she's good and ready.
Wow. How big will she get?
So she'll probably get to around about 9 feet. If her mother is any indicator, her dad was quite large as well. So I want to say that he was about a little over 7 feet. The mom was like 8 feet and a couple inches. So she'll probably get to around about the same size as her mom. So she'll probably be quite large. She'll be very heavy bodied. So she'll get a nice chunky body, but it's going to be very muscular. Even now, even as a baby with just kind of a little bit of muscular development, she's got some good muscle tone in there. These guys are extremely active. They need a very, very large enclosure relative to this, or just large in general. They need a lot of room to be able to move around, areas to climb up, deep enough substrate to where if they want to, they can burrow, a large enough water bowl that they can completely and totally submerge themselves in, preferably with a little bit of room to move around in. These guys are not excessively reasonable for most people because you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices for them. She, as is right now, has to eat anywhere from 3 to 5, or every 3 to 5 days. So sometimes she's eating several times a week.
Oh, wow. Now, will her pattern remain the same, her colorations, or will she change as she grows?
So for the most part, most of these guys, these brown areas right here are going to get a lot lighter, and these areas are going to remain pretty dark. Sometimes they'll go almost completely black. Sometimes they'll be a really dark brown. So she'll change colors quite a bit as she grows. We'll start to see a little bit more definition on the pattern on the back of her neck at some point as she kind of lightens up. The chin may become a little bit more of a yellowed color, whereas the rest of it's probably going to remain that nice creamy color with a lot of the spots here. You're being so good right now. I really appreciate it. That's very nice.
She is being good.
She is excessively tolerant. So like any other snake at her age would have every right to just twist around and grab a hold of my hand. And I wouldn't blame them. I wouldn't blame her for doing it either, but I always greatly appreciate the fact that she is very calm. She's very easy to work with and handle. She's gotten rowdy on me a couple of times to where I've had to get the hook and the gloves. But most of the time, she just kind of is very calm. And when she eats, the nice thing about her not having the typical feeding response that we see with most of these false water cobras, where they're open mouth, swinging around, grabbing at anything that they can, is that she did try to eat my finger one day. She opened her mouth and started trying to position it over the tip of my finger, and I said, So I moved my hand out of her way. I let her sit for another 3 to 5 minutes, so that way she realized that trying to bite in any capacity is not okay if you're not in your enclosure and if it's not food. And then I got her back into the enclosure and went and got her something to eat, and lo and behold, she ate right away.
Wow. Dragonlair says everyone I know that has them says they paint their cages with poop.
She has so far been really good about pooping just in the substrate. The thing that I don't appreciate about her poop is that she tends to do it when she's burrowed or when she's just going into or coming out of her burrow. So there's a good portion of it in the substrate. So I've got to go on a little dinosaur dig for false water feces.
Do
A
you
lot
keep,
of them have a tendency to do that in their water bowl as well. Do you want up on the chest? Is that what you're wanting?
do you do any bioactive enclosures? I can't remember.
What's that?
Do you do any bioactive enclosures? I can't remember if you do.
No, I've been toying around with the idea of doing a more naturalistic setup with a cleaning crew in there. I do use things like real leaf litter. I don't do any of the real plants because for whatever reason, every single time I've tried to put live plants in an animal's enclosure, it doesn't work out really well. I can maintain a plant by itself and an animal by itself, but for whatever reason, when you try to put the two together, something happens to where the plant's like, I'm out, and it just keels over on me. So I just give her rubber and plastic plants. There's another keeper that has an adult in the UK, and he told me, he goes, that's probably a smart move for the rest of her life. And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I've spent probably the equivalent of a couple $100,000 at this point on different plants and stuff that I put inside Felicity. That's the name of his snake, in her enclosure. And she has just absolutely destroyed every single one of them. So it's all been wasted.
Right.
Like, that's fair, man. We'll stick to the plastic stuff that I can get at the craft store that looks nice.
Right. Yeah. She might be a good one, really, to have some isopods, or I use isopods and darkling beetles in my corn snakes. Of course, you're not supposed to keep more than one corn snake together, but I do juveniles, and it's been fine so far. But they really
I think corn snakes are a little bit more on the social side than what we had initially thought. There is another keeper that I know who has, I want to say, 3 corn snakes that on multiple occasions she has tried to separate them, and they will refuse to eat. They refuse to eat. They refuse to do anything that they're supposed to do if they're separated. They will go to a corner of that enclosure when they're by themselves, and they will sulk, and they will not do a damn thing. And she says that it absolutely infuriates her because she knows that she's going to catch flack when people see it, because of the fact that they're supposed to be a solitary animal. And I said, look, as long as they're not causing any problems, and if they're not breeding uncontrolled, I said, then it's probably not that big of a deal. I mean, if they're thriving for you, then, just make sure that they have enough space. That's really all you can do at that point, because you don't want them starving themselves to the point of death because you separated them and they want their buddies.
I got the popo, the corn snake popo police got me in a stream 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I think I got banned from there. I'm not sure. I know I got timed out, but wow, it was just the stream owner. And then one other person started telling me, they're stressed out. They're competing for food. They're competing for basking. And I'm like, they are not. I make sure they all, get to eat what they need to eat. And they come up. They take turns. They come up. They don't come out of their enclosure, but they come up, and I feed them with tongs. And I mean, I have one that's a little street hood. He tries to take the other mice, but I don't let him. I let the others get theirs. But in the wild, snakes are going to have little arguments and stuff too. But they're not fighting and all that. They've got plenty of everything they need.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're thriving and they have enough space to do it, if it doesn't seem to be bothering them, if they have space where if they want to, they can get away from each other, then that's fine, because there are some snakes that are a lot more social than what we kind of initially thought. Garter snakes are a great example of a snake that's very, very, very social and has really strong connections to other snakes. And it can be devastating to have only one or two garter snakes at a time. Yeah. So they're one that often requires a small group. And I think that it's just typical of most corn snakes to be more solitary, but I don't think that, based off of what I've seen with the handful of times that I've seen them cohabitated, it's not necessarily the end of the world. As long as everything is being met, where you've got ample space, ample food, they don't look stressed, they're not dumping weight, anything like that. They've got access to all the same resources and things. I think that typically that would be probably okay for at least a little bit. If you start to notice like breeding behavior or something like that, then maybe that's probably a good idea to start separating them so you don't have out of control clutches. But
some of these guys are right at a year old, so I'm on top of that. So.
All right. Well, does anyone have any questions about just kind of general questions about snakes or nutrition or diet, exercise routine, anything like that? Oh yeah, rattlesnakes are a good one for social interactions too.
I won't have to be testing that out, but would you keep? Well, you do have a venomous snake, but would you keep something that's potentially lethal, like a rattlesnake? Or
I've thought about it. I probably wouldn't work it by hand like I would with her. This is probably about as close to dangerous as I want to get, because for the most part, I have a very fond, I don't dislike venomous snakes at all. I love them. Some venomous snakes, like the rhino viper, are some of the most stunning animals that I've ever seen in my entire life. I would love to, at the very least, have like a very nice statue of one that looks extremely realistic, to where you would be hard pressed to tell that it's not real, just so that way I can hold it, because it's not reasonable to expect to be able to touch one of those things. So I mean, like, this is probably these guys and maybe Boiga, or something like Helodermis, the Mexican beaded lizards and Gila monsters would probably be about as venomous as I would want to go, just so that way it's something that I can handle and I can explain to people, like, it's very unlikely that I will have any major long-term or extremely quick serious issues if I'm bitten by this animal and I'm assuming the risk. Do not do this at home. Because I want to be able to interact with my animals and have that bond. Like, even though she was getting a little bit rowdy on me, she's still being really well behaved. She's still being super calm. She's being very cordial, considering that she's in unfamiliar territory. There's smells from snakes that she didn't even know existed from other parts of the world where she would reasonably never ever be. So I just kind of feel that I want to be able to have that experience to be able to handle and bond with my animal. Yeah, so she's out in a different room because she's still in quarantine, especially while I do all the rearranging in here and get new enclosures put in and all of that. It's a huge, huge, huge mess. It's horrible. As soon as I've got everything done, I look forward to getting like an enclosure kind of set up, going to where I can kind of stand in front of those when I'm doing my lives and such. But the base temperature of the room, during the summer, it gets warm. It doesn't get so warm that any one of these snakes can't handle it. It stays during the summer around about 80 and 90 degrees, which is the warm temperature for all of these guys in here. If they have all of their heaters that they have are on their own thermostats. So there is a probe that constantly measures that temperature. And what happens is if it gets too warm in here, it shuts their heat off. And if it gets too cold in here, it turns the heat on. I have an ambient heater that keeps the room at a minimum constantly 70 degrees. 70 degrees allows a much easier time for the heaters of each individual enclosure to either be on or off to keep the cool side of their enclosures at the minimum temperatures that they need and the warm sides at the basking temperatures that they need. So everyone has their own little climate control to their enclosure. So it gets to be a little bit of a hassle to set all of that up. But everyone has their own kind of control, and it doesn't get any lower than 70 degrees in here during the winter.
Heat lamps or heating pads or heating mats?
It depends on the enclosure. So the snakes that have more of a tendency to burrow, so like she has overhead, so that's going to be the heat lamps or a deep heat projector. The Great Basin gopher snakes all have overhead deep heat projectors. The ball python has an under enclosure heat mat with a thermostat on it. The boa has a mixture. The top lamps that she has almost never come on because the bottom one keeps doing what it's supposed to. But she has independent control for those, so that way she can have a warm back heat. And if she wants to get down to the ground to get that belly heat, she has that as well. So just depending on the enclosures, if you're using a PVC enclosure or a solid piece of plastic enclosure like a vision cage, overhead heating like a radiant heat panel is going to be great because it just constantly is bringing the temperature down. It's very similar to what you would see in nature with the sun. If you have a glass enclosure, you can do the same thing, but they do have a tendency to dry out the enclosure super, super fast. If it's overhead, whether that be a ceramic heat emitter, a deep heat projector, heat bulb, the halogen lights, anything like that has a tendency to really dry the air out and the substrate out in that enclosure. So with glass enclosures, if you have a drier climate animal, that overhead heating is great because you can go in there and mist when they're going to go and shed, and it'll keep just enough humidity in there to help them shed without being too humid, too dry. They can do what they need to do and they're not going to get respiratory issues. If you have a more humid or more tropical species, something like her, she has to have more regular misting done just because she is quite the burrower. So I don't want to have heat on the underside of her enclosure where she's going to go when she wants to cool off. But she has a primary basking spot where it gets nice and warm. That temperature carries over in a gradient to the other side where it's a little bit cooler, so that way she can move back and forth. And then for hers, I just mist the enclosure down. Or you can use the under tank heating if it's an animal that doesn't burrow, that's going to be mostly on the surface of whatever substrate you have, or just in hides or what have you. Then you can do the under enclosure heating, which will not dry the air out quite as much. So that will be a much slower dissipation of the humidity that's going to be in their enclosure, which can make it a little bit easier to maintain it the way and at levels that you want and need it to be at. So it just kind of depends on the individual setup that you have, what the enclosure is made out of, what temperatures do you need, what are the behaviors of the animal. There's a lot of people that really harp on only ever doing overhead heating. And for a lot of animals, yeah, you can do that and it's going to be totally fine. It's just that if you start to notice that you're really struggling with certain aspects of the husbandry, like the humidity dropping too low and you can't cover, if you need something like high ventilation and airflow, so you can't cover any ventilation of the enclosure to maintain that humidity in there, but you also need it to remain at a certain temperature, and that humidity has to be high, the airflow has to be high. Under enclosure heating tends to be a good idea, or a radiant heat panel, because they don't dry out the air nearly as much. Right. So it just kind of depends on what you've got going on and what your needs are. But depending on that and how you want to set it up, you can make either one of them work. It's just depending on what kind of work you want to put into it.
Oh, that's nice, Jenny Lynn.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. And
And
anytime
Bruce?
you guys have questions, if you guys find me on TikTok, on Instagram, on what else am I on? On YouTube, anywhere that you guys find me, if you guys have questions, you can always send me a message. I will try to get to it as quickly as I possibly can. I don't always sit there and cycle through all of my stuff. I have a full-time job that I have to do during the day. So it's usually going to be in the early morning, at some point in the afternoon when I take my longest break of the day, or when I'm fully done with my shift at work and home, where I can then kind of check on stuff, and then I'll answer you guys' questions. If there's ever an answer that I don't have for you, and I know someone that would, or I know a resource that would, I will get you guys directed to the best possible place for that information, or where I would most likely go to that.
It's her and
Up there, much
and
appreciated.
it's her and Bruiser CB. She says you've earned our, so they're nice people, my buddies.
I don't know, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I was thinking that if ever get to meet, we can talk snakes for hours.
Right.
Didn't I tell
We'll
you
go
that?
to the bar, we'll kick up, we'll close
Yeah.
that bad boy down.
Yeah, I told you guys reminded me of each other. Yeah, so
One of the highest compliments that I have ever gotten was during one of my own lives. I was talking about nutrition and interaction with snakes too, of like the importance of getting your snakes enrichment and exercise, and working that animal to make sure that it maintains its intelligence, that it maintains curiosity and all that. And someone told me that I sounded like Kevin McCurley, and it warmed my
oh yeah,
little heart lit up for a couple of minutes. I was like, oh my God.
yeah, that's nice, awesome. Well, that when you said working, that reminded me a little bit of our little bit of venture into keeping snakes in racks, and talking about calling that you refer to them as working snakes and that kind of thing. And I told you that helped me. I just have some unresolved issues with that, especially when I see my snakes enjoying or appearing to enjoy things and benefiting, from being out. And so it just kind of makes me feel bad for the other snakes, but I guess they have a job to do. So I don't know.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to personal preference. There's been a thing that, as far as I know, it started on TikTok, and a lot of people have been kind of using it, and it's like a hashtag group kind of thing, like a collaborative, overarching project or mentality called You Do You Reptiles. And basically all it is kind of a mission statement of there are multiple ways to maintain and keep these animals. There are definitely absolute wrong ways to do it, but for the most part, there are also a lot of alternative ways to do it that you can get the same result. If you keep an animal in a tub or rack system or a minimalistic enclosure, but you're taking them out a healthy amount of times during the week, so that way they can get enrichment to where they're not just constantly staring at the same blank space over, all day, every day. Then that can be just as effective as having a very enriching enclosure where that animal can, kind of monkey around and explore and do fun things inside the enclosure. They just get to do that outside of the enclosure. And for some people, that is how they want to maintain their animals, and that's fine. I like to do a more naturalistic setup just so that way when I look into the enclosure, it doesn't just look like a box or a glass tank with nothing in it. Except for a couple of like hides and then some substrate, and that's it. So I like to set everything up to where it looks really similar, or as similar as I can get it with the materials that are available to me, to what you would see in that animal's natural environment. Give or take certain things like the substrate. I like to use the crushed cocoa core because it gives me a great deal of control for humidity. It's antimicrobial, so it's really great for resisting against things like mold and just preventing a lot of issues. So I use that stuff because it gives me a lot of control over the specific aspects of what's going on in the enclosure. But aside from that, there's like natural rocks. There's in some of these enclosures, there's actual pieces of bone that the snakes can use as a spot to rub on to get their sheds pulled off. Or the smaller guys have bone chunks in there so they can hide underneath them. There's natural pieces of wood. There's fake plants that are meant to look like plants. Some of it is meant to look like the plants from their actual native range, and some of it's just kind of generic plastic greenery. But that kind of gives them some textures and things to interact with and feel up and check out, and it just looks nice. So there's a lot of different ways to maintain these animals, and if you have an animal that you're breeding, then that's probably going to be more of a working relationship where you interact with that animal when you have to maintain it, to clean it. And as long as you keep the enclosures, nice and clean, if you want to do a more sterile setup, then, you can probably do that. This nature's breeding larger. Yep. And that's where I stand with it, is that for my animals, even if I were to start breeding the Great Basin gopher snakes, or when I start to breed them, I won't keep them in racks. They'll just be in their normal enclosures. But there are some species that will do better in a rack or tub system, like sunbeam snakes. Overexposure to UV and super dry air from having them in a more minimalist or in a more open enclosure to where it's really large can stress them out, make them sick, and they can end up passing away from it. So if you have like a fossorial species, like, you can probably just maintain them in a tub or rack system and it's going to be fine. Ball pythons, they can do okay in them because it's not super different from the conditions that they're going to typically live in. Things like termite mounds, anthills, burrows, things like that. But it is nice to give them things to do outside of that hiding area, so that way they are encouraged to come out and interact with their environment. But when it's a working animal like that on a large-scale breeding facility, I understand that there's a constraint for size. Realistically, people probably don't need to have that large of a collection to be able to maintain a business if they're just breeding pet quality animals. But for people that are keeping them at home, if you get a collection that's large enough to where you are forced to start using racks, it might just be a good idea to start downsizing, just so that way you can give your animals a happier lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree. Well, if there aren't any more questions or discussion, we'll start to wrap things up. We've been going almost 2 hours. I can't believe it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy.
So we've kept you a lot longer than I told you we would. So I'm sorry for that.
For hours. Anyone that'll sit and listen, I'm willing to to spout everything that I know about these guys.
No, it was a great show. It was absolutely a great show.
Yep. Maybe we can lure you back again with a different topic.
I'd love to come back on. I try to do like more of the centralized theme for each of the lives that I do on TikTok. And a lot of the time, people asking questions all the time kind of doesn't derail it, but I can tell that there's just new people that aren't already into snakes and reptiles, that like they want a more broad spectrum kind of thing.
Yeah,
you already got people wanting me to come back.
Yeah, you're getting rave reviews, and you got dragon layers seal of approval. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's a great opportunity, and I love the chance to get good information out there to people that, that want to learn, that want to know these things, and that want to improve the care for their animals. So I always really appreciate it when people are willing to have like a good discussion, or that want me to come on and talk about anything from like U.S. native species to the animals that I keep, just general husbandry, dietary stuff, exercise, handling techniques, things like that. I always super appreciate it. So I'm very grateful to you guys for having me on and letting me sit here and chatter all night with you.
Well, I'll get with you, and of course I'll see you in your streams, but I'll get with you and see if we can come up with something else in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Be awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to. There we go. And you know what I told you last night, I can't get rid of this worm, so there she is.
Always at hand.
Always at hand. Okay. Well, and by the way, I linked this to YouTube, so if you want to see the comments from people that watch it, I think it'll render by tomorrow. It usually takes overnight, but they can start posting comments on it. So if you're interested in seeing them, you can.
Yeah, I had a couple of coworkers today asking me what I was doing this weekend, and I told them that I was going to be doing a formal guest spot on a podcast, and they were like, "Oh, all right, really cool." So I'm sure they'll be very happy to be able to find that video and check that out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and we will say good night, and I will end here. Thanks, everybody.
A lot of information and very cool. It was a good live stream. Thank you very much.
It was.
Thank you so much.
I told you guys, didn't I? And thank you for all the links, Huawei. You're awesome. So, all right.
Yeah, I super appreciate all the links and keeping everything moving. It's an absolutely wonderful experience.
Really made it great. All right. Good night, Nate, and goodbye. Goodbye.
Good night, guys. Y'all have a good one, and I hope to see you soon.
Nate, it was great meeting you.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you guys too.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Have a good one.